As usual, another great guest, but a quick diversion. You'll notice that our full name is the Marketplace for Health, Wealth, and Freedom. Well, let's talk about your health for a moment. If you'd like to escape from the stranglehold of insurance and be able to see alternative doctors or go across state lines for care, then you definitely need to take a look at patientempowerment.mpb.health and see if that's the fix you've been looking for. Now, let's get back to the show.
Welcome, folks, to Freedom Hub's Health, Business, and Politics weekly webinar. I'm Charlie Froman, and I'm joined by my co-host, Jim Grapek. And today we have an Advanced Therapy Institute founder, Kim Green. And this is an exciting topic because wearing one of my other hats as lobbyist for National Health Federation, I've known that for years we've supported safe harbors. But in Freedom Hub, I've gotten to know the scholar out of the 1889 Institute who have been working on another effort to replace licensing based on private certification. And when Kim showed up on that webinar, how you could get yourself exempted from licensing if you follow the criteria of a private certification, I realized we had to have a follow-up with Kim to talk about safe harbors. Because if private certification is not an advancement from licensing, and we instead should proceed straight on the safe harbors, then we need to discuss that, because so many of us in the liberty sphere and the health freedom sphere just want health freedom. So whatever path gets us to that, we want to be open-minded and give a platform to any pioneer who's got some experience on the topic. And Ms. Green certainly does have that experience. She'll talk about sanctuary states, the problem with private certification as being just an add-on to licensing, so it doesn't address the problem of licensing that we're all trying to get rid of. Licensing has more attention right now just because of the early treatment doctors getting their licenses threatened if they do try to prescribe early for COVID patients. But even before COVID, licensing was a problem for maverick doctors. They would often be targeted by the licensing boards if they didn't follow the pharma-led algorithms for standards of care. So Kim is going to talk about the problems with certification, the benefits of safe harbors, how they have existed for a long time in a lot of states, and then how we can join her effort to bring safe harbors to more states. She runs an advanced bodywork institute that recruits massage therapists and nurses who want to really incorporate the treatments around touch and acupressure and a more integrated approach to healthcare. And that's really up our alley, as Jim, as the founder of Pavilion, and I, as a salesman for a sharing plan that does really encourage alternative care, both commercially and as advocates. We want to really support the upgrading of the health market to more integrated treatments and healing. So with that, Kim, I'll turn it over to you to sort of introduce the world to who you are, what you've been doing over the past decade or so, and where we are today.
Oh, thank you so much, Charlie, for having me on. And I just wanted to say how much I appreciate you for doing this and putting this kind of information out there. So a little bit about me. In 1992, I started practicing alternative bodywork and had used both modern medicine as well as alternative medicine for years. And it wasn't until 1999 that I found out that alternative medicine was illegal. And all the practitioners that I had used over the years, they were actually facing criminal charges for helping me and my family. And I thought that this was really a crime against humanity, that these people who had helped me so substantially could be put in jail and face felony charges for an act of healing. So it became my passion and my mission to change these laws. And I originally found a woman by the name of Diane Miller, who is up in Minnesota. who helped me, and she mentored me in helping create an organization here in Colorado to change the laws in Colorado. And these were safe harbor laws. And basically, it just carved out a little bit of space for alternative practitioners where we could be exempt from the Medical Practices Act, because under the Medical Practices Act, they talk about palliation. And anytime you palliate a human ailment, that was considered the practice of medicine. And so people couldn't suggest, they couldn't recommend, they couldn't even decrease the suffering of anyone without facing felony charges in all 50 states. And that's actually currently how it is today, except for in 11 states. There are safe harbor bills where people can practice alternative health. And we also have carved out in Colorado a space that had given exemption to those maverick doctors. That got changed in 1999. Senator Ron Tupa took that bill that said, you know, if you're a doctor and you didn't practice based on, you know, what your the normal protocols were, that you could not have your licensing taken away as a doctor. So we've used the exemption process in both alternative health and for maverick doctors. And I think that it's very, very important to have all opinions out there and all things available. And I want to list off the different states that do have health freedom in them right now. There's Idaho, Oklahoma, Minnesota, California, Rhode Island, Louisiana, Arizona, New Mexico, which I also helped with that state, Colorado, Nevada, and Maine. And so these are all states that have health freedom for alternative practitioners. And then some of them, not all of them, have health freedom for those maverick doctors that kind of want to go outside of the parameter of what the licensing boards allow. But I want to share something, and this is a very, very important point to make. Right? So when we go back to the certification associations, we aren't really going back. This is nothing new. This is actually what created the problem that we have today. And I'm going to share with you a little bit about the history, because if we don't know our history, we're doomed to repeat it, right? So first off, I want you to know that back in the 1990s, when I first started lobbying, it took me 14 years. And with the help of a handful of people to get alternative health legalized in Colorado. I started in '99, and then I did not get it legalized until 2013. So this is a lifelong battle, and I still have to go to the Capitol every year and make sure that our laws aren't infringed upon. And so this will be something I do for the rest of my life. It's not something that you go in, you look at it, and you say, okay, I'm just going to spend a year, we'll get this changed, and then everything is good. No, laws constantly evolve. People come into the place, different people come in with positions of power. They have different views, they have different ideas. So laws evolve as people rotate through these positions. So if you don't understand that process, you're like, how did we get here today? Right? We started out actually in the 1800s with private certification associations. And as things evolved, this is what it's led to. And I want to give you a little bit of history. So and what I'm seeing in the United States today. It used to be that we were a republic. You could go up to the Capitol, you could lobby, and as a volunteer, I always lobbied it as a volunteer. I never did it for money. And you could get things changed, you could get things accomplished because we were more of a republic. Our legislators had more of an interest in listening. And then over time, what I saw us changing from a republic to an oligarchy. And so when we look at what an oligarchy is, an oligarch is just where government officials and large companies have coordinated together to take choice away from the people and instead control the people and all their finances, all their choices, everything. So right now, we no longer have an oligarchy where many of our represented officials listen to us. Or we no longer have a republic. We have an oligarchy where they are listening to campaign contributors, and then just a select few people who are in control that they pass policy on behalf of. And I'll get into that here in a little bit. And it was because of these certification associations in all industries, not just medicine, in all industries, that's led us to an oligarchy and losing our republic. So, so much like Russia, there are those organizations and associations that are oligarchs. Well, we have the same thing here in the United States. So let me backtrack a little bit. I'm going to go back to 1820 when there were two organizations around the 1800s that were formed. They were formed as a private certification association. And many people don't realize this. It was the U.S. Pharmacopoeia was created, and so was the American Medical Association created. So what happened in 1820, there was this private undertaking of physicians, colleges, and pharmacists that created a list of chemical compounds, oils, drugs, and other substances normally used in apothecaries. So they created the first policy under the guise of labeling that took over complete control at the exclusion of all other beliefs and practices, all of these kinds of medicines. They also created the first private certification organizations, which I shared. And that's what's really being promoted now. But we don't really want to go back and repeat that because you see where it's led today. And so what happened is these certification associations said only people who go to these universities can then practice and medicine. And so there are many colleges, many universities, alternative health practitioners, herbalists, nutritionists, homeopaths were all completely made illegal. Also, most people don't realize this, but chiropractors and osteopaths were deemed illegal at the time too, and all their colleges were shut down until they could fight for their right to practice again and come into the mainstream. But for many, many years, it was illegal for chiropractors and osteopaths to practice in the United States. So just because there was this difference of opinion of what was deemed a healing act or could palliate, a human condition, then there were certain organizations that said, no, our way is the only way. And it really took it took freedom away from people. So what I really want people to think of is a lot of the doctors who are mavericks, right? And a lot of the doctors who for the first time have been vilified and had their licenses revoked are actually facing the same punishments that many alternative practitioners, as well as chiropractors and osteopaths, faced for over the last 100 years, because we had a difference of opinion. So for many, many decades, a lot of the people who belong to the AMA, they all were very rewarded by believing in this very structured system that only had one belief system. But as soon as they go outside of that system, then they're going to be vilified. But this time they were vilified en masse, instead of just only one person here or there where they didn't toe the line, right? They were vilified en masse. So for the first time, people within the AMA are actually receiving the kinds of treatment that all these other practitioners have historically, been under, the oppression of through the AMA and the pharmaceutical associations. So for the first time, they've been punished for having differing beliefs and differing thoughts. And I'm not saying, they're getting what they deserve. That's not it at all. I don't believe that anybody should be punished for differing beliefs and differing thoughts. So I'm asking people to have a much different paradigm shift in their mind. Instead of, we're the professional, we know best, we need to come to the place where we don't have our patients trust us blindly, right? We don't have our clients trust us blindly. And we put self-advocacy back in the public domain where it belongs. We're no longer are we trusting modern medicine blindly, no longer are we trusting alternative medicine blindly, because that's what we've taught our clients to do. And this is wrong. This disempowers them. We need to teach everybody in the United States. You question doctors, you question alternative practitioners, and you are your own self best advocates. And you take your healthcare back as is your right. And you learn and you educate yourself and you figure out what happens best in your body. My father's 94 years old. I remember I asked him one time, I said, Dad, how did you live so long having so many health issues? And he said, I was my own best advocate, Kim. And he was pre-med and he worked in hospitals for many, many years. And he said, what I saw is I saw people trusting blindly. And he said, I promised myself never to do that. So when it comes to my own health, I look up, what are these medications going to do to my body? Is it going to be smart? I look up, the mode of reaction, how they work in the body. And knowing my own body, I decide what's right for me. And then I go to the doctor and I tell him what I want. And if that doctor doesn't listen to me, I find a different doctor, because if a doctor tells me that they know best, he said, I don't ever go to a doctor or an alternative practitioner who's going to work with me that way. So we need to have this paradigm shift where we put health choice back into the hands of people, and instead of and we go towards self advocacy and self education. So now let's get to the safe harbor bills and what these do. So, well, let me go back just a moment. So what happened with these associations is that over time, as they evolved, then somebody new would get on the board of the associations and they'd say, oh, you know what, we need a regulatory agency for this. We can't really, we don't have any teeth, so we need a regulatory agency. And so the first original regulatory agency was the department under the Department of Agriculture, which then became the FDA. So that was the first regulatory agency that these private certification associations put into play. And then the next thing that happened was that they said, well, this regulatory agency doesn't really have enough teeth. So we need these medical practices acts in all 50 states. And so they started lobbying all the politicians, giving them very large campaign donations, which they could acquire through their association. And then they made it where a palliative act was a criminal act in all 50 states. And then that's where I come in, because I don't believe that a palliative act is a criminal act. A healing act between two people should be just that, a healing act where two people come together and they decide, one person decides that, yes, I want you to do this for me. And the other person says, okay, I'm going to serve you in this way. And that is what a healing act should be. There should be nobody else involved in that healing act. And I'm talking about doctors too, because a lot of times a doctor will say it should only be between a patient and their doctor, right? And I believe it should be between two people, regardless of the profession. So, and that's what I fought for. So let's go to what's happening in Colorado. And this is why we don't want to replicate this. And this is actually happening. I read this yesterday because as I said, I still follow the bills. So we're going to take massage therapists as kind of a generalization. So massage therapists wanted to be more credible, right? Licensing was never supposed to be about credibility or about standards or ethics or anything like that. The original licensing laws and how they still are supposed to be carried out today is this practice dangerous? Without that particular procedure, will the person die? If they'll die, if they don't have the procedure, then there should probably be licensing, but there's a caveat. The person could die by having the procedure. So both those have to go together. Will the person die by having the procedure done because the procedure can kill you? Or will the person die without having that procedure? That is the line that has to be crossed for any licensing law to be implemented. That is the law of the land. And it's not about standards. It's not about education. It's not about any of these things. That is the level of care and the level of danger that any modality has to come to for licensing to take place. And that's across all professions. It's not just in medicine. So, but what happened is that massage therapists wanted to be more credible in the eyes of the public. So they went for licensing with the regulatory agencies. In the state of Colorado, the Department of Regulatory Agency is not in the budget. The only way they exist is through licensing fees. Through the more people they get licensed, then the more money they have to run their organization. Now, when I first started working with the Colorado Department of Regulatory Agencies back in the 90s, they had one floor, right, of employees, and they only had a handful of employees. Now they have 14 floors. So they've been able to talk all these different professions into licensing, so that way they can then create fees, and they can be more self-sustaining, and it's just on and on and on. And so massage therapists came together, they wanted to be licensed, and they said, okay, so we just want to be licensed, and that's it. And then there were these private certification associations that came in and said, no, we need to have standards, we need to have testing. So there was an organization I used to volunteer lobby with for the health freedom laws, that when I first worked with them, they said, oh, we're totally against licensing. We want health freedom. Within 3 years of them gaining political power, this organization then said, no, we want licensing and we want testing. We want standardization and testing. And guess who created the test? That organization helped create that test because it was a moneymaker for them. So they created a test. They went back to the state. They said, hey, we need to have testing. There should be a national testing. There should be a state testing. We're going to help with this testing. And I felt very betrayed by that organization, by the way. And I fought them. And, but that's what the massage therapists want. And I believe in allowing people what they want to do. So if the massage therapist wanted to regulate themselves, that was fine. They could go ahead and do it. But leave the health freedom people alone, where all other alternative practices were outside of that sphere. Now, fast forward a little bit. We got our way in 2013. The massage therapists got their licensing. Alternative practitioners, we were able to practice as long as we didn't rise to that level of harm, right? Rise to that level of harm that's in the original licensing standards. And most don't. So then what happens over time with any legislative policy is that then somebody else comes in and, oh, I want some control over that. So I just read this in the Massage Therapy Practices Act this morning and yesterday. They are doing away with the certification associations, licensing, testing, right? And now it will be under the discretion of the Department of Regulatory Agency director, what that test will consist of, what it will look like. And so for years, they worked with these certification associations. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, they aren't doing what we need them to do. They aren't, they aren't really what we want, right? Remember how I said words evolve? So the Department of Regulatory Agencies have kicked them out. They're repealing all of the testing, and it will be whatever the director says. This is one person who is not an elected official, who is deeming what is appropriate for an entire group of professionals in the state of Colorado. And we never want that to happen. So when people talk about certification associations, I'm like, why do you want to go back to what we originally had? We're just going to recreate it all over again. We need to think outside of the box. We need to have safe harbor exemptions. And let me explain that a little bit. Safe harbor exemption within the Medical Practices Act, it says as long as you don't reach that level of harm, right, you can do whatever you want. And so, and within reason, not whatever you want. You can't go out and kill people, right? But as long as it doesn't reach that level of harm where the person either is going to die without the service, or they will die if they don't get the service. And then there are other things in the exemption that, that alternative practitioners can and cannot do. So, and everybody always, the big complaint is, but it's not safe. We have to keep the public safe. No, the public is responsible to keep themselves safe and to be self-advocates. And we must teach the public that is where they have to go. I'm talking about a paradigm change. I'm not just talking about a legal change. We have to have a paradigm change with it as well. The other thing too is I have an argument for that. It is actually very safe. In Minnesota, they had their health freedom law, or their consumer choice law. This is a consumer choice law. The consumer decides, I want this service. And so it's a consumer choice. It's not a practitioner protection act, right? It's a consumer choice act. So in Minnesota, they had a complaint office. Minnesota was the very first state in the nation that had an exemption kind of, freedom choice, Consumer Choice Protection Act, because we want to protect the consumer's choice, right? And so they were one of the very, very first states to ever have this. And they had a complaint board because they had to do something in order to, to make sure that everyone, was appeased. Anyone who was fearful that all these practitioners were going to hurt somebody, they had to appease them. So they created a complaint board. After 5 years, and I think less than maybe 38 complaints or something like that, the governor actually closed that complaint board down because they didn't receive enough complaints to keep it open. And it saved the state, I think, around $30,000 to $36,000 a year by closing that complaint board down. So for those people who say, well, but people get harmed, right? That's not what we found. We found that people aren't being harmed, and there are very few complaints. In the state of Colorado, the majority of complaints are for sex trade, right? That's what the complaints are. There's not a lot of complaints regarding this person hurt me or anything like that. So, and the other thing too is I hear doctors say, well, I've seen so many people in the hospitals that have done something, that have harmed a patient. What do we do about that? Licensing cannot change that. It can't help that at all. That is an education issue. That's an education issue, and that's an ethics issue on the behalf of the hospital. Does that hospital keep an untrained, professional who is not doing their job appropriately? So that's an ethics issue if the hospital keeps them in their employ. And then it's also an educational issue. Are your universities that everyone has to go to really training their students correctly? If they were training their students correctly, those things would not happen. And so, so when I hear those kinds of arguments, it's like people are mixing and confusing that legislation and licensing can actually help with these issues. It doesn't help at all unless the behavior changes at home, and that home is in that hospital and in the educational facility. So, so what I really advocate for are exemptions for maverick doctors, because I do believe in modern medicine. I'm not a purist. Just because I use holistic practices, I use modern medicine too. So I'm not a purist. So I want to advocate for two things: public self-advocacy, put health back in the public domain where it belongs, with people, as well as, and so that's a real paradigm shift, as well as using safe harbor exemptions within medical practices acts to make it legal for all options to be utilized. Now, back in the 1940s, 1950s, and I had tried to look this up, and I apologize. I think it was, I cannot remember the Supreme Court justice's name or the name of the case, and I can find it later if people are interested. There was a Supreme Court decision when the AMA and the Pharmaceutical Association came in and started taking on all of these other professions. And there was a doctor who had a cancer cure. His name was Dr. John Christopher. And he decided, or Dr. Johnson, I can't remember, sorry. He decided that he had this other thing that helped with cancer. And so the FDA went after him for false labeling. And there was a Supreme Court decision that said multiple opinions must exist in the medical profession because everyone is different, and that one organization could not monopolize the belief system of the entire public. And that is a precedent-setting Supreme Court hearing. But then what happened is, over time, is that once again, the AMA, the FDA, all these different regulatory agencies and associations, they ignored that Supreme Court decision and started trying to do more regulatory offerings. And I want to end on this note because I think this is very, very important. Benjamin Rush was a signer of the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights, right? And he stated this, and this is what has happened, and this is what private certification associations have created in the United States. Benjamin Rush stated, unless we put medical freedom into the Constitution, the time will come when medicine organized itself into an undercover cabal, creating a dictatorship to restrict the art of healing to one class of men and deny equal privileges to others. The Constitution of the Republic should make a special privilege for medical freedoms as well as religious freedoms. And I stand by his statement today. So I hope that, I hope that I've kind of explained to you what the issues are with certification associations, what the pitfalls are, because we've already done it. This is where it's led us, as well as then, a solution to the issue and trying to make health freedom in all 50 states, even for those maverick doctors, which I love maverick doctors. My brother's actually a maverick doctor, so it's good.
Fantastic, Kim. Folks, if you have questions under the reactions tab, you'll see a raise hand icon. So just press that. That way we can hear your thoughts. How important is it to get the maverick doctors joined into a coalition so that we could have a broader advocacy effort for safe harbors? Because isn't it kind of reputation-wise seen as a way for alternative care to get out there to have the differences in beliefs allowed, but maybe a lot of allopath doctors who want to get more integrated or try new things just aren't as aware of the safe harbor option?
Well, I don't think allopathic doctors are aware of the safe harbor options. The other thing too is that what I've noticed is there's this battle between alternative practitioners and allopathic doctors, and that war has to end because one side always believes they're right over the other. And that's not true. There's necessity for allopathic doctors. There's necessity for alternative health practitioners. Many of the alternative health practitioners will look at the allopathic doctors who are getting more into alternatives and the education they're taking, and we're all going, wow, they're still teaching them in a way that we would never practice, right? So we still have like differences. And so the one thing that I'm seeing, and I do not want to see, is I do not want to see allopathic doctors say, once again, our way or the highway, and put all of these other practitioners out of business, because that has been historically what has happened with those associations. It's a battle of egos, and the egos need to go away. And so allopathic doctors and alternative practitioners need to come together and understand all of us are needed and work together in order to put safe harbors in for all alternatives being practiced by people other than just allopathic doctors, because we've been practicing this for thousands of years. And now what I'm seeing is the allopathic doctors who are more mavericks are coming in and say, only we should be allowed to practice that, when they've only had maybe, 15 or 20 years worth of schools coming into the United States and training on this. They actually don't have as much training as most of the alternative practitioners that are practicing today. So we need to put all those differences aside, and everyone needs to come together in a coalition and just allow the public to decide, who do they want to go to? Do they want to go to this person? Do they want to go to this person? It should be consumer choice, not us fighting over territory.
Jim, before you ask a question, Kim, do you know any of these maverick doctors personally who have gotten exemptions in the States? And if so, are you friendly enough with some of them where they could have that needed open mind to be part of a coalition? Because it sounds like you've got a good idea here.
A lot of times what I find has happened, I've tried to make inroads with many allopathic doctors saying, can you be open to this? Many times they are not. And I will just share that with you right now. I do know several doctors here in Colorado Springs that they are maverick doctors, and they're very open to alternatives. They believe that there's room for us all. But a lot of them, are retiring. They're retired and they aren't in the game anymore. So the majority of the issue that I come across is a lot of allopathic doctors who are getting into alternatives, once again saying, we know best, and only our profession should do this. So I do need more people who are open-minded that will come to me and say, hey, I'm open-minded and I want it for everyone. But I find that to be, it doesn't happen very often. but that has to be laid aside because you see what's happening in our country. We have an oligarch. We no longer have a republic. And so that is a very dangerous place for all of us to be. So the fighting has to stop and we have to come together in unity. The other thing too is you have to remember that in 1999, the Maverick doctors, that were getting nailed and were getting busted, they put in an exemption into the Medical Practices Act with Senator Ron Tupa, right? That they could practice in the state of Colorado, and they could practice alternatives and they could practice allopathic medicine. And then what we did is in 2000, we fought from about 99, 2000 to 2013 to make all alternative practices, as long as we didn't cross that threshold, legal in the state of Colorado. So in the state of Colorado, it's not as serious as in other states, but it's a very serious issue in other states. I do have a woman in Oklahoma who is a very good friend of mine, who she's trying to make it to where Oklahoma was always a health freedom state, but they're trying to go in and they're trying to gobble up that territory and stop it. So there's different organizations throughout the country that are trying to make alternatives legal, as well as there are certain people who are allopathic doctors that are trying to recreate what Colorado has. But the majority of the time, they want to once again make all alternatives illegal within their what they're carving out with their exemption. And that's what I'm asking to stop.
Jim, may I have one more follow-up? So it's from a limit on the carve out, their exemption, that they're trying to expand their scope of practice with an exemption, but exclude everyone else. How does that work?
With the exclusion of everyone else, yes.
Okay, Jim, go ahead.
Thanks, Charlie. Thank you. Great effort and talk. Wow, a couple of points. You had mentioned earlier, it's like and I saw some chatter. It's a battle of egos with some of these allopathically trained physicians. I want to jump in and say that I think it's all about the money. It's their training. I mean, they've been trained to have these egos. They've been trained to believe stuff. And I mean, back in 1977 and more recently too at Stanford, but let me just read a quick quote. I was just writing a blog on this actually. Dr. Beverly Winnicott, she was the spokesperson at the Rockefeller Foundation. Now that, again, Rockefeller was basically John D was the creator of allopathic medicine and this monopoly, the cartel we have today. She came out and publicly said, appropriate public education must emphasize the unfortunate but clear limitations of current medical practice in curing the common killer diseases. In reality, there is very little our medical science can do. Like, okay, well, that should have turned some heads. I mean, right there, that's what they're saying. But it got passed up, and we jump up to, the big government accountability office study. They study out of Stanford, Dr. Ioannidis or whatever. I never get his name quite right, but and a lot of the industry researchers saying that it was in the Lancet, it was in JAMA, between a third and a half of all medical science is false. Mm-hmm. Okay, I mean, that just needs to go in front of legislators, or we need new legislators and people to see this, because we have a medical system here that, you might trust your doctor, might be a nice person, but even they don't know which half or third of what they've learned is correct or not. So the impetus is on everybody to get additional opinions, to self-educate and so on. So, the whole system, and I think now that if there's a silver lining, there are silver linings in this whole pandemic COVID situation, is that there's a lot of corruption. I mean, all these agencies are like criminal. They're criminals, period. And I think a lot of people, including allopathic, these maverick doctors, or open-minded, a lot of doctors are seeing this because they're getting shut down as well. They see the science, and this isn't science. So what do we do? Definitely safe harbors is the right direction. I mean, I think it's going to need to go, and it will go much beyond this when we start seeing people put in jail. And then it's okay, well, we need a new version, that plan B, so we have better agencies, some sort of regulation. Yes, definitely for allopathic medicine, drugs, we need them. We have the best acute care that used to call it battlefield medicine, but it's not medicine for health. It's medicine if you're in an accident or you've got something really serious going on, or at this point, a lot of other people, right? So as I see it, and maybe you want to add to this, the whole paradigm will shift. We need to be working together side by side. You know, I was listening to a biological dentist the other day. It's kind of, they separated the same thing back in the early 1900s. They separated dentistry from regular medicine, you know, from physical medicine. Kind of like your head isn't connected to your body, but it is. And a lot of the things we have going on in our mouths, a lot of the bacteria and gum disease, et cetera, is translating into heart problems, lung problems, everything else. You know, so everything does need to shift. And thank you for what you're doing.
And I do want to address something you said is that, well, we need to put it in front of these legislators. Actually, I don't feel we need to put it in front of these legislators. We need to educate the public that they have to be their own best advocates, because it's the public demanding these services. If you carve out exemptions for all these different professionals, those professionals who are good, right, are going to remain. Those professionals who are not good are going to go out of business. And so if we put it back into the consumer's place, and yeah, we regulate things that can possibly harm people, like kill people, right? We take that level of licensing, and that's what we focus in on. But all these other maverick doctors, they just get to go out and they get to practice. And all of the other practitioners get to practice without being controlled by governmental agencies, by regulatory agencies. That's what's happening in Colorado. We went from 26,000 practitioners who were practicing illegally, unknowingly illegally, when I first started, in with the Health Freedom, to over 150,000 practitioners practicing without any governmental regulation and oversight in the state of Colorado. We have now been deemed one of the healthiest states in the country. So, but we don't have regulatory oversight, so we don't need those pieces. So that's what exemption really does. And the other thing too, and I love this, there's this old Japanese thing that used to happen. So in your community, if a person went to the Japanese doctor or the Japanese practitioner, and that Japanese practitioner did not make them well, that person did not have to pay them.
Sure, yeah.
They didn't have to pay them. And so very quickly, that practitioner went out of business if they weren't a good practitioner. And so, I mean, that would be my ultimate dream, is going back to the Japanese way of health, that if that practitioner doesn't actually help you, then you don't have to pay them. But also the Japanese would lose face if they did help them and they refused to pay them. Then that was like dishonorable. So there was this really beautiful relationship between practitioner and patient, and the patients drove whether that practitioner was in business or not. And that's where we have to really get back to.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I think even with the acute care and some of that licensing you're talking about, for example, we can go to Mexico and get vitamin C IVs for cancer treatment, or Laetrile, or other proven cures and things that are much safer. Whereas in the United States right now, you can't find that. So this needs to be changed as well.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too, I think that's really important for people to know. There's a new push. The World Health Organization just came out this week where they want to have an international treaty signed, where our regulatory agencies, as well as the CDC, would answer directly to the World Health Organization. And for those of you who don't know, the World Health Organization had this old program that they're implementing right now called the Codex Alimentarius program. that changes things at a manufacturing level, vitamin C will never come off of our shelves, but the vitamin C formulary that manufacturers are allowed to create, the formula in that bottle will be different in the next several years. So it won't be as efficacious as it used to be. So I really encourage people to find out, how do you make these things yourself from scratch?
And I think Charlie knows, because NHF has been talking about working with them. They're also lowering doses in vitamins, which is
Yeah.
something.
Yeah, I'll
And
put in
our
the chat.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. And our DSHEA Act is supposed to protect that. But and the DSHEA Act is the federal act that makes vitamins foods. But if they are allowed to sign this international treaty, then the new formularies will be passed down from the World Health Organization to the regulatory agencies, and then they will be put out to the manufacturers. The manufacturers will be closed if they don't follow the new formularies.
Yeah.
Maybe we need, maybe
So-
we need to create a new state. Sorry.
If I can comment on that, as the lobbyist for National Health Federation, our president, Scott Tips, is the lone natural advocate attending these Codex meetings. And our monthly Zoom is Friday. I'll put in chat the link for those who want to register to hear Scott talk about Codex. And we may have some news on the World Health Organization treaty efforts, as well as these vaccine passport infrastructure efforts that are affecting most of the states. Speaking of medical tourism, Jim, Christina Demores runs the International Business Chamber of Commerce for Medical Tourism. I butchered the name. Christina, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hey everyone. Kim, I'm sorry, I came on a little bit late, so I just kind of got the tail end, but I didn't want to jump in, but my passion for patient advocacy and, the right to choose and all this stuff is very much, I think, why I'm actually in what they call medical tourism, because it's all about, free market system. I go where I'm best treated. I go where I'm respected as a patient, where I have access to, procedures or treatments. Jim touched on it. You can go there and get, IVs and things like this and that's one thing I've seen in medical tourism. I've been doing this 20 years now. The allopathic, as we say, in other countries, I got my start in Brazil, they're much more respectful of the homeopathic side of things. I mean, for example, in Brazil, we were doing, major reconstructive plastic surgery, but, the doctor was very interested in prescribing things like arnica afterwards. And doing a manual lift drainage massage after surgery, and this sunflower oil for something else. I mean, I was really, at the time, so 20 years ago, charmed by the idea. First, I was like, that's, silly, because I've got this, Western world training of medicine and everything like that, healthcare. But when I saw the results, I was just like, well, that's a no-brainer, And here I am 20 years later, and I see that, something is proven as manual lymph drainage massage has still not, eked its way into the system here, and not just for plastic surgery, but, basically any surgery. Reduces swelling. I mean, what's not to love post-surgery? I mean, it's just such a no-brainer. So that's one thing I really love about medical tourism. Again, and I don't want to call it medical tourism because, this idea of botched and everything doing, and yeah, but bad stuff, believe me, happens all over the world. I have two patients I'm actually advocating for here in the United States, and both of them, I have been so frustrated with the sheer level of ego of the doctors here and their staff, just, not returning calls, just, not being able to satisfy the patients, not listening to them. I mean, I had a patient tell a doctor my pain level is 8, and she said, well, I don't think your pain level is really 8. It's like, really? I mean, who are you, And I think the nice thing about medical tourism / free market healthcare system is, like I said, I can go where I'm treated best. I can go where the doctor's going to respect me, where, he's actually interested in having me as a patient because I'm going to pay him, and if I don't do a good job as the doctor, then I might have some trouble, So I'm so excited about, I'm gonna have to talk to you afterwards, but just this idea of, even being able to collaborate, between doctors. I had a patient I had to send to Mexico because she needed a hysterectomy because of her age and everything else. Basically, they weren't allowed here, but yet she needed it in order to have, she had fibroids and things like that. And, it's just, so I just have such a passion set for, first and foremost, for patient advocacy, just treat the patient well. I mean, the ego in the industry is just absolutely abhorrent. And, but, this idea that you have of, licensing and certification and things, it doesn't protect you at all. You're absolutely right. It doesn't make them a good doctor whatsoever. And I see so many, you kind of talked a little bit about accountability. My three things are advocacy, aftercare, and accountability. And that's what gave me my success in my original business endeavor, helping patients and things like that. But I really feel it's a model for all of healthcare to embrace. If we can promise those three things in healthcare, then we will absolutely revolutionize the industry to make it much more humane. I also, one of my other little things are, let's put care back in healthcare. Why do we insist on taking care out of healthcare?
I do have a little bit more background on that before we run to the end, if you don't mind me interrupting.
Sure. No, I'll be quiet now.
Oh, I just, there is a piece that we in free market maybe are forgetting or don't know about in the history of medicine. The Hippocratic Oath is generally regarded in a positive light, but it includes many protectionist pieces. And it's coming up on 3,000 years old. That's a lot of history and culture to overcome. I think maybe knowing about it and confronting it may be helpful. It actually prohibits physicians from competing with each other. And in the free market, if you can't compete, you go to other means. And that's where a lot of licensure and before that guild system came into place, that it protected these practitioners. And I mean, we like the part about maintaining privacy of their patients, but we kind of have to split that thing out and make it more public, I think. And the other piece that may be helpful to everyone here is you can sign up for the FTC releases. The Federal Trade Commission is becoming more weaponized. I've been following it for about a year. And in the past 4 to 6 months, their amount of work is increasing and their number of releases is increasing. And I just opened one that came in 22 minutes ago. FTC proposed order stops marketers from continuing to promote supplements using baseless health claims. So that ties right into what Kim is talking about. We just, there are a lot of arms to the federal and then the state level as well. And I like the idea of a safe harbor. And I do believe that the place we need to start with it is local and state level. As individuals, we cannot fight against the whole federal government. But if we change our state laws, that creates a stronger federalist barrier between us and the federal behemoths, the big guys. So,
and that's why we really push states' rights over federal rights. And that's why, that's why we want it to be at a state level. We still want those counties and those cities to have safe harbor areas, but a lot of times they still have to follow the state constitution, and they're applicable to a lot of those rules. So the state is like the best place to get these safe harbor laws passed for everyone, because I don't want to say, well, my way is better than anyone else's way. I want the person to choose, and so, and
I just wanted to mention that on the
thank you so much.
philosophical level, that is a moral judgment. What is best, what is good, what is ideal, what someone needs. Those are moral judgment calls. We don't have government in place to make our moral judgments on that level. in America. This
Mhm.
country is about religious freedom.
Mhm. It is, and we should have health freedom too.
Well,
It should be just
yeah,
as sanctified as religious freedom. This is our
yeah,
body. This is our temple.
yeah. If you
Mhm.
go back to that Hippocratic oath, it's very much about religious faith and religious positions, that just taking an oath. That's saying that you're accountable to a higher power. So
Mhm.
it is, it's dealing with those um, core issues of beliefs and faith, and um, controlling your own actions as accountable to not only the individual that you're dealing with and under the governments that we deal with, but under the spiritual powers.
Mhm. Yeah. So just real quickly, I think that that's a wonderful place to really look at, is that Hippocratic oath. Also, Abigail, you had friended me on LinkedIn. For some reason, LinkedIn won't allow me to friend anybody at this point. So just so you know, LinkedIn is not working properly. I can't get into a lot of my Google Docs. I can't share a lot of stuff. So I have been censored a little bit. So I just wanted to share with you. I didn't flake. I tried to friend you multiple times. Yeah. Wonderful.
Well, thanks so much, Kim. We are running out of time. Do you want to give a final thoughts of how we can get this coalition going and how folks can reach you?
So the best way to reach me is through text, obviously, because my electronics are not helping me right now. And so the best way people can reach me is really through text at 719-231-5715. And I think that if I don't even know if this went out to everyone who I shared it with. I shared it with over 500 people yesterday when I was finally able to get into it. And so it's interesting that that nobody that I had invited is on tonight. But I think that probably the most important thing is to come together as a group of like-minded people, reach out, find those allopathic doctors who will work with us, because I do need help in finding those allopathic doctors who are open to all, um, and then come together and start branching out and making it happen on different state levels. There are already a lot of groups out there working on this that we can join in, and but you have to have a seat at the table or you get left behind.
So what about your wealth? If your money could actually talk to you, would you listen to it? Well, with the DNA Network Academy, your money actually can talk to you, and it's going to tell you just what it told this client. This family had over 24 debts, mortgages, car loans, the works. They were on track to take 20 years to pay it all off and instead did it in 8.5. Plus, they did it without refinancing, making more money, or even changing their lifestyle. So find out for yourself with a free analysis that is completely confidential. No personal information, no social security numbers, no credit checks, none of that nonsense. But what is exciting is that the outcome of that report you receive is a guaranteed outcome for you. To get that report, head on over to bit.ly/debt to wealth. You will arrive at this simple form. Fill it in as simple as lender number 1 and credit card number 2. What really matters is the accuracy of your numbers. You'll be able to see that if instead of 20 years or whatever your number is, that you may actually be out of debt and on your way to wealth in as little as 6.3 years like this client.